So at the outset, let me thank IPA for this opportunity given to us to come and present uh, about what we understand about the advancements in cold chain logistics. And I think it's a very appropriate time to be having this discussion, as just today we are celebrating India having completed the vaccination of 100 crore doses, and as we know, all this entire vaccination effort has actually happened through a cold chain setup. So I think it's time, as we acknowledge all the healthcare workers in the country for having achieved the feat, and we also acknowledge all the people who have manufactured and supplied the vaccine. I think it is also important to understand the complexities of what goes into making the vaccine available to millions of people. So uh, so in that context, I think it's a good discussion to understand what cold chain logistics is about, not only in terms of vaccine, but also in terms of all the other products that use this network. Like whether it is oncological products or complex biological products. A lot of products require cold chain capabilities to be set up and to be managed. So that is, I'll kind of talk about the advancement in cold chain logistics with that as the backdrop. Uh, we can go to the next slide. So certain part of this is, disclaimer. This is forward-looking information. So I have to kind of put this disclaimer. We can move on. Uh, but first, before we jump into the topic, I will not miss this opportunity to talk a bit about the organization that I represent. I represent Dr. Reddy Laboratories Limited, and which you all know was founded by Dr. K. and G. Reddy. And the mission with which this organization was set up to improve life expectancy and the quality of life, and use good science to make affordable medicine. That is the mission that our organization works towards. We can move on, please. So we are there in 40 plus countries. We have 400 plus products, and we serve a billion plus patients worldwide. And as I said earlier, we accelerate the access to affordable and innovative medicine. A little bit more about my company. The next slide before we move to the topic of cold chain distribution. Next slide, please. So we have we have 9 API manufacturing plants, 13 formulation manufacturing facilities. We have 5 global R&D centers, and our revenues were 2.3 billion USD in financial year 20. So these are the list of the countries you can see on the slide. And move on. So this is how we'll talk about the topic here, and I think I have roughly around 30 minutes to do it. So just a quick look about what the quality standards are for the elements of cold chain, what the template, what has been the cold chain public infrastructure, and how do you set up a cold chain network, what are the elements, and what are the challenges on last mile distribution, and what are the quality systems. So with that, let me take you to the next slide, and just a quick walk down memory lane. Cold chain actually started, when perishables had to be moved hundreds of years ago. Let's say, we're talking about fish and meat and other food products. So, as expectedly, the earliest technology was using ice. But around 1930, the first portable air cooling unit was put on trucks, and then very quickly they started putting the refrigerated rail cars and trucks, and perishable food could be carried around in long distances. In 1959, we first had a proper reefer truck, uh, you know, and through a series of innovation, then we are where we are right now, where we have a complete ecosystem of cold chain transportation and logistics and warehousing. And of course, what you see on the picture on the right hand side is the ISO 634-635 reefer container. So let's talk a bit about the quality standards that are required to be that are required to be running a successful cold chain logistics setup. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I just tried to put together a lot of standards, that are required to be followed from a quality perspective when it comes to cold chain management. First and foremost, of course, we have to talk about the warehouse storage, and there you have the WHO Technical Report Series 908 and 961, and Supplement 2 actually specifically talks about the design of the warehouses and what considerations need to go in when we are designing a warehouse that is to deal with cold chain. Now it becomes more interesting when you're talking about a frozen warehouse. Like normally when we talk about cold chain logistics, people think of it about 2 to 8. Um, while outside of the pharma industry, you do have a very, an ecosystem of scale that deals with, sub-zero temperatures of -20 or more, like say for the ice cream sector. But within the pharma space, something that moves at a scale at -20 or -70 is a phenomena that we have seen with the COVID vaccines that came in last year. Otherwise, as you know, blood plasma and some other products, they do require significant negative temperatures, but not to the same scale as that we are talking about right now. Road transportation, again, there is a ISO 23412 standard. When it comes to air transportation, there is a regulatory or a airline body which we know as IATA, and IATA has come up with its own guidance for vaccine and pharmaceutical logistics distribution. IATA also has its own temperature control regulation. Sea transport has ISO 6346. Then you also have the European Good Distribution Practices, and US Pharmacopoeia Chapter 1079 and 103. These are known chapters. We are all aware they have been there for some time. But now, when it comes to last mile distribution for vaccines and other products that require temperature control, one of the missing elements are the freezers. Okay, because you might have standards for warehouses, you might have standards for transportation, but the freezers that are there in the clinical settings, or they are there in the vaccination centers, they also need to be of a medical grade. So here, two relevant regulations are the European Union Medical Device Regulation of 2017 and Medical Directive of EEC called 93/42. There is also a CFR 21 regulation of FDA that deals with the medical grade freezers. So you have to put, when you're trying to put in a complete network of logistics that require temperature control to be maintained, you need to be aware of all these standards, right from what you have for the primary warehouse, how you transport it by road or by sea or by air, and then when you are actually doing for the last mile and the kind of processes and controls you need for the point of administration, then you have to follow these the standards that are there on medical devices. Just a word of caution here, a lot of these device manufacturers, they will just quote some standard and say, okay, hey, we are compliant with WHO, we are compliant with this thing. So just be very careful about what standard is being quoted. Does it really actually apply to refrigerators? Does it apply to medical grade freezers? Or, they could be quoting some radiation standards or some electrical standards or, safety. So just because some supplier is telling you, okay, we are compliant to so and so regulation, it does not mean that that is a regulation that you need to be very careful about. So understand which standard applies when you are signing up for these services or products, and see that the products or equipment that you're buying are compliant to what is actually required. So I just put this slide about the various compliances that are required, from a quality management perspective. So let's go on to the next slide. So here I've just tried to put together a template for an end-to-end cold chain setup to be done. So as you can see over here, there are multiple elements to it. So if you start with a manufacturing plant, then there is the global distribution center or a central warehouse. Then it has to go through a series of airports, sometimes two, sometimes more than that. There could be a transit airport in between. Then again, there is a handover that happens at the airport, then it goes to a secondary warehouse, then it goes to a regional warehouse, then it goes to a final warehouse. So the point that I'm trying to make over here is that there are multiple touch points over here. There are multiple points where a handshake between one partner to another partner takes place. So each and every time your shipment is moving through this network, it is getting exposed. Those are the points of vulnerability. Now, it's difficult to put it on a slide, but if you just see the first movement, so from a manufacturing plant, it moves into a truck. But the process of, transferring from a plant into a truck itself is a vulnerable movement, because you might be exposing your product to an ambient environment, and your product might not, the label in your product might say that it cannot be exposed for that duration of time. So a complete end-to-end process analysis and identifying of those touch points and identification of those handover points where there's a change in custody, where the product is getting moved from one environment to another environment. An organization needs to do it end to end and take complete ownership that your cold chain logistics for your product is set up correctly. Now, this is just one linear flow that I've set up. Okay, now imagine that if you were to set up this distribution flow for the entire breadth of the country, so you can imagine that this is panning out like a tree, and add to it the complexity of a minus 20 product or a minus 70 product, you can just understand, you can imagine that the complexity becomes exponential. So there is no escaping it. This end-to-end study and identification of vulnerable points, identification of the touch points has to be done. This is what every organization needs to do if it's trying to set up end-to-end cold chain for its products. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so another thing that I just wanted to highlight is this is something that is there in the public domain. This is a data of public cold chain public infrastructure in India for vaccine distribution. Now, this is data is of course pre-COVID, and after that, a lot more infrastructure would have been created to transport this 228 vaccine and the minus 20 vaccines. So you can see that there are deep freezers, around 40,000 deep freezers. There are around 28,000 cold chain points. But what is interesting is for you to note is look at the complex network these vaccines actually move through. So there is something which is called a GMSD, which is a warehouse only for buffer stock. Okay, so these are regional level warehouses. Then you have state level vaccine stores. Then you have regional level vaccine stores. You have divisional level vaccine stores, and you have district level vaccine stores. And there is a multiple. This is not a one-to-one relationship that a GMSD necessarily has to supply to a regional vaccine store. A regional vaccine store necessarily has to supply to a state vaccine store. A state vaccine store necessarily has to go to a divisional and division to a district. As you can see from the arrows, a vaccine can be supplied from any store which is at a previous node to the next node. Okay. Now try to imagine what kind of controls are required to handle such a complex network. And we've not even gone to the next stage of primary health centers and clinics and the outreach program. So so the point is that the process that you set up for handling cold chain, especially when it's moving like a country which is the size of India, it has to be very robust. It has to be completely under control and the oversight of the quality organization. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, these are the elements. I've already articulated some of that. You need a storage facility, such as a temperature controlled warehouse. And now you have two options. You can have a complete warehouse wall to wall, which is cold, temperature controlled. It could be a warehouse which is completely at 228 or minus 20. And if you sometimes people also have something which is called a freezer farm. So they could have individual freezer units in a very large warehouse, which itself would be ambient, 15 to 25. But the primary point is you need a very large central warehouse. Packing, we'll talk about it a little bit. Transport, monitoring, and data monitoring and recording for retrieval and audit. Having data loggers at every point and every point in the and every transport point in the chain. You have to have, and you need to have a good quality control system that manages for failures. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay. A little bit deep dive into a warehousing facility for cold chain. See, it's not that something that comes into your warehouse in a shipper, you just put it in the warehouse and just forget it and then take it out. That is not possible because these packing solutions that we have to use, they come with a certain validation, and you have to use it only for those number of hours, whether it is 72 hours or 120 hours, but they will always have a finite number of hours wherein they have their life for maintaining the cold chain. And also, it becomes highly uneconomical to store them that way. The way these boxes come into your warehouse, so you necessarily have to receive them, unpack them, put them in bins or trays, and then put them on a rack. And once you get a dispatch order, you again do the cycle in reverse. You pick them, you pack them, and you put them out on a staging area, and then it goes out on a refrigerated tank. So imagine, these many touch points, even for a single box to be handled. Okay, and then when you're talking about 1 crore doses to be moved through the network a day, so you can imagine how much effort actually goes into each and every warehouse that is handling. So if it is 1 crore vaccination happening at primary health centers, those are warehouses at the back end, previous nodes through which also these vaccines are moving. So it is 1 crore into the n number of nodes that these vaccines actually flow through. So therein lies the complexity of managing the cold chain. So, and if you are doing this activity in -20 or -70, then you need to be all the more careful about how you manage this warehouse. Can we move on, please? So, a warehouse does not actually operate unless you have a system that enables it to pack the material that is over there and make it ready to move for the next stage. So herein comes in the other element of the solution, which is called the insulated box. So as you can see in the picture, insulated box is a combination of an insulation layer, a payload box, gel packs. So anybody who's worked in the cold chain environment knows that you need to condition these boxes. Okay, so if you're trying to move something at 228, you will need freezers to condition those PCM material at -20. If you're trying to move something in -20, you need to have freezers that are able to cool your PCM at -40. Okay, so you have various solutions to do that. You have blast freezers, you have plate freezers, you have walk-in chambers, uh, you have chest freezers. So all these options are there. But these warehouses that we were talking about in the earlier slide, they do not work unless they are in parallel equipped with these freezers, which are capable of conditioning the boxes at even greater negative temperatures. So if you're talking about say X number of boxes to move, then you can back calculate how much freezer capacity you need to install here. So you need a combination of three things. You know those many boxes to be ready per day. You need the facility for conditioning. You need the storage space. So all the three elements come together. That goes into creating one node which is ready to handle a cold chain product. Okay, it is not just a warehouse. It is a warehouse plus many other things that come together. Let's move on, please. Okay, for transportation, there are big trucks which are available for the long haul. They should have cold chain system alert, failure alerts. We prefer GPS tracking, geofencing, and please be very careful that when you are signing up with these contractors, you have a quality agreement in place in addition to your commercial contract. So a commercial contract and insurance, of course, they are important, but a quality agreement and service levels that are defined, they have to be signed off very explicitly with your 3PL partners. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an interesting aspect. It is very, difficult as it is even to handle long haul. Now imagine the last mile wherein from a district center you have to take a cold chain product to say a primary health center, or further what's more complex, you have to drop it at multiple points, say in a city. Okay, so there are many ways to do it, and one of the solutions that is there over there is there are of course stationary freezers that are required at both the sending end and at the receiving end, but you also need a mobile freezer. Now, there are many kind of mobile freezers which are available. If the volumes are high, you can use probably a small size refrigerated truck. But if these are smaller volumes, which normally is the case, maybe because you are trying to do something like a few hundred vaccines per day in a particular location, which could be a residential welfare association or a local panchayat, or any other point where people come in and get vaccinated, then you need smaller side freezers. But the challenge over here is how do you power those freezers? So whatever solution you choose, please ensure that they can be powered on by a battery, and they can be provided power by the power of the car. Normally an SUV is a good option, so you can do some sort of a milk run, or you can do a point to point transfer wherein the freezer is charged by the car en route, and you have a power point available at the destination, and then you can bring it back for recharging at the origin clinic. So that is one model for doing last mile distribution. Let's move on to the next slide. Similarly, outreach programs. So this, you can see there's a small picture on the left hand side of the mobile freezer. So you can simply go and drop the product, whatever that is, to these vaccination centers or these clinics, and come back, return freezer, and then power it back. So this way you don't require, the problem that this solution is solving is that you do not need to provide separate freezers at the last point. Okay, because when you try to put freezers at every point, every receiving point, that requires an investment. Okay, and that point itself might be a moving goalpost. It's not that you will be going again and again to the same point. So if it is going to different points, and you really do not want to create that infrastructure, or that creation of that infrastructure is not ready, then a portable freezer can go deliver the product, and at the end, it can come back. So these are certain models that have been developed and deployed in cold chain transportation. So you can imagine. So there are multiple legs, warehouse to regional, regional to district, and district to last mile. So end to end, that was the thing I've been talking about since the first slide. So when we move to the next, so a very important aspect is cold chain monitoring. Okay, so a cold chain monitoring, you need the right size of sensors. Uh, they have to be necessarily wireless based. It could be a Bluetooth device, or it could be RFID device, or it could be something that connects to Wi-Fi through a regional, a local router. It has to have a battery. Uh, the important thing is many of these electronics, they do not function properly in sub-zero temperatures. Okay, so when you do this validation and this proof of concept for choosing the temperature monitoring device for your cold chain logistics, please ensure and check with your supplier that the performance of this device don't deteriorate the moment they hit a sub-zero temperature. We have experienced that not all devices meet the purpose. Sometimes the data loggers can work, but you find that the gateway devices, they don't really function at those temperatures. On-device storage of because you'll be requiring a lot of storage on that, say, the 5-minute data interval rate. So please ensure that your on-device storage for that many number of readings is there. Multi-sensing, that means that it can monitor the vaccine temperature, it can measure the shock, it can handle the pilferage, so supposing there's a light exposure, a door of the container is opened, so that it could be able to respond to that and also report to you when you get that product that there has been exposure to light. Barcodes and QR code help in unique areas. So anti-counterfeit measure needs to be built into the product. That's also very necessary. So you can see it's a combination of a sensor or a plus a barcode and a gateway and a cloud. Now you can give this access to the cloud to as many users as you want, but what is more important is that the ability of this entire chain of data that is moving from one point to another point, it synchronizes. So multiple sensors transmit via Wi-Fi real-time data of shipment that is in transit. It should be able to capture where it is. And also, it is not that once you receive the product or you go and review the data that you realize that an exposure has happened or an excursion has happened. in some products, or an incursion of temperature has happened. So you need to have real-time alerts. So the moment you realize that the temperature is progressing towards the range where it should not progress, then an alert should go in the form of an SMS. Uh, an email also helps, but a phone is something people always have with them at any point of time. So alert that comes on the phone that this particular freezer in this particular location, it is experiencing some kind of an excursion, or this particular shipment at this point in time, it is experiencing some kind of excursion. So real time alerts have to be sent. But what is also more important are local alerts. Okay, so knowing that something is going wrong somewhere is not important unless you have set up a mechanism wherein people are able to respond rapidly. Okay, and who are the people who are available at the so there's an alarm that sets off, say at 2 a.m. in the morning. So who do you think is going to come and rectify the situation? Definitely not the engineer of the refrigeration company, or definitely not the engineer who set up the entire HU system for you in the warehouse. It is the local security person over there, who will rush to the site and try to report what is there. So somebody so there is a local alarm system which is audio based, like a hooter alarm going off, alerting somebody at the security, or some other engineers who could be there at the site, and then the connections can be made with the people who actually are responsible for maintenance of the facility, and some troubleshooting can happen on the phone or on a digital mode, and while people are able to respond and come physically to the site. So alert mechanisms is extremely important when you set it up, and a local response process, a remote response process, and ultimately, capturing the kappa of something. If something does happen, then how do you record it, and how do you respond to it? Just one point of caution, because all these things, they require power, and all these things require a power backup. So please do not kind of put all these mechanisms of monitoring and that alert mechanisms on the same power source. These are some quick hacks probably I can share with you. Always have independent sources of power, and always have independent systems, even in terms of where you have connected the software, and where you are how you connected your devices. So have a backup, and though it might look like an ambitious target, but it is recommended that you have this alert, data monitoring in each and every freezer location that you have, in your territory, each and every truck that is moving in your territory. It might look like a very complex system, and it is complex, but it is necessary that these mechanisms of collecting data, recording data, archiving them, retrieving them, they are there as as we do that for any quality system. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So something that were top of the mind, and which are really very basic to somebody who works in the quality organization. Detailed SOPs have to be prepared activity wise. Training has to be done. Review of training has to be done. Validation for different components. We spoke about this earlier: boxes, freezers, warehouses. Lane assessment with transit temperature study. Do a validation study for each and every lane you're trying to move your product to. Risk assessment, the every touch point that we talked about. Assessment of risk every time a handshake happens between custodies. Evaluate the risk, mitigate it. Put something, put an action plan so that that risk is mitigated. Temperature monitoring, we just spoke about that. Alarm system, documentation for dispatch and execution to be ensured. Review of documentation and monitoring dashboards. Good. It helps you to have a MIS reporting in addition to the transaction reporting that we just talked about a while back. Let's move on. So some key considerations when you're designing it. So let's understand that here we are talking about scale, number one. Okay. It is not just some small product that is moving, say, in hundreds of boxes. We're talking about millions of boxes which are moving through multiple nodes every day. okay, and at multiple touch points, multiple warehouses, multiple transportation solutions. So the problem that we're trying to solve here is scale. The problem we are trying to solve here is speed, with the backdrop of compliance, with the backdrop of quality systems. So how do we achieve that? Uh, then the obvious thing is that we need to design a network that has the minimum number of touch points. Don't try to overcomplicate the network design. If you are able to do something with large MOQs, point to point, then nothing like it. But if you need to go and spread the network, branch out, try to see that the how you can redesign and how can you innovate to keep the touch points at a bare minimum. Okay, and then you put the temperature control mechanism. Insulated boxes. Now there are. I thought I'll speak to about this in a little more detail. So there are 72 hours and 96 hours. These are normal validation boxes that are available in the market. There are also some which are available for 120. Now the value of these boxes, I just want to articulate it a little bit more, is not that they are providing you protection in transportation. Okay, that is not what the primary objective of these boxes is. Temperature protection can be provided to you in transportation by n number of active transportation solutions. You can simply put it into a reefer truck, or you can simply put it into an active container for air freight. There are not one, there are many solutions which are available for transit. What you need the insulated boxes are for protecting your product at the touch points. I'll give you one example. So you have to send something by air. Okay. Now, if you try to send something by an airport, what are the exposure points? The moment your product is getting offloaded from a truck and getting into an airport terminal. The moment your product is moving from an airport terminal into an area where it is put on a pallet. The moment your pallet is moving through the tarmac of the airport and getting inside the aircraft. So even at a singular point, you can see there are three vulnerable points where no active solution is going to work for you. Okay, so you need these insulated boxes to protect your product and ensure that it is moving as per label by the use of these insulated boxes. And since we're talking about new innovations or technologies that are there in cold chain management, it will be I think it's good for you to point out that there are solutions. The moment you put a product back into a cold warehouse, then the actually the clock stops for that product. It's not that the 72 hours clock or the 96 hours transit clock is still running. So there are certain products, the moment it gets into a minus 20 environment, then the clock stops. The moment it moves out, the clock starts moving again. Or it's a 228 product, the moment it gets into a 228 warehouse, you need not take out that product. The clock stops. Okay, and after 24 hours, you take it out again, then again the clock starts. So evaluate the market and see what kind of products and new technologies that are there, which are passive in nature, because active solutions, they are very good, but they might not give you an end-to-end protection. So evaluate those kind of this thing. Of course, we know refrigerated vans, temperature control solutions for air freight, medical grade freezers. Again, we spoke about that. Continuous monitoring, geofencing in transit tracking, standard operating procedures. Again, we cannot emphasize that uh, too much. And digital platform to end-to-end visibility, that gives you the visibility for temperature, that gives you the visibility for geofencing, uh, for humidity, and for doing your ERP-based transactions such as a shipment out and a shipment in. So whatever your network is, please these 10 points, see how you check on these tech points, on these 10 points, and create a network that gives you the compliance and the confidence that you require for handling the product through a closed chain network. We can. So that's all from my side. So thank you for your attention, and thank you IPA for this opportunity given to us to present our thought process and our expertise that we have kind of gathered over the past many years in handling cold chain of our products in India and in abroad. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Over to you, Sneha.